Hey everybody and welcome back. We're about 2 weeks into Trial by Frost and I'm as hyped as ever. The other day, a really cool package showed up at my door. When I opened it, it was this really exciting Trial by Frost box, and when I busted that open, there were some cool things inside. We have this Eat Me energy bar in the bottom. Man, I'm excited to try that, and this super cool scarf, and plenty of packs too to start my pack opening itch. So yeah, that was really cool. I also got to attend a pre-release and a release event for the game, and yeah, it was pretty cool building my decks for those. This is the first one. I was able to go 3-0 with this, and there's nothing super special here, but I feel like there was just a lot of good value. The geysers really pulled their weight, so a lot of times you're just going to see someone drop in a 4-drop, and when I was able to return that to their hand with geyser and then get a mana advantage, it just made the rest of the match that much easier. Also, the Winter Nova was super good in draft, being able to take out 2 of your opponent's reserve cards and then put 4 worth of stats on both sides. It was pretty rare that someone would be able to have like a good answer to that with just the cards in their hand. And so yeah, this was a pretty fun deck to play, but this next one, that was really something special. I enjoyed playing this deck a ton. It was super cool to be able to use Sierra as a hero. I haven't really had that opportunity in Sealed that frequently, but with so many good permanents, you can see them all in the top left corner here. It was pretty easy to trigger the hero multiple times throughout the game. Nilam was amazing. I honestly fell in love with this card playing this deck. It's just like so powerful in Sierra to be able to play it out and immediately have 4 worth of stats and then this powerful landmark set up for the rest of the game. There just felt like there was a ton of synergy here with a lot of cards that would let me either exhaust and resupply or have like the cooldown or exhaust my opponent's cards. And then yeah, some like pretty good payoffs with Nilam or maybe even like Flutter of the Moss and some of those. Yeah, it just felt like a lot of fun to play this deck, and it really felt almost like I was playing a constructed deck when I was going through the different rounds of this tournament. So many cool interactions came up. One of my favorite ones even was in the last match in the finals. I played the Icebound Peak, and then on the last day, I think I only had, I was like 1 counter short with nothing in reserve, except for I was able to play the Machine in the Ice, sending it to reserve, and then I was able to drop down Vike, and because of that, I could play exhausted cards in reserve, letting me get that last fleeting counter to pop the Icebound Peak, and it left me with an incredible board to take both sides for plenty of overkill to take that final game. If you have the opportunity to participate in a sealed or draft event coming up, I definitely encourage you to do so. I think that this set especially just feels so well designed for draft. It felt like every opponent I faced was able to come up with like really cool interactions, being able to mix the 3 colors, and so was I, and it just, yeah, it was a great experience. Now though, I'm not just going to be playing Sealed and Draft for the rest of this expansion. I do want to build some of my own decks, and it's pretty hard without the marketplace or a pretty big like local scene in my area. So I really am looking to trade for some uniques for some new decks. I really want to bring you some exciting content. So I would love if you guys want to take a look at some of my trades. I've put together a document. I'm going to make a post on my channel, and I'm also going to put that in the description here. I've got all sorts of cool uniques that I have extra that I'd love to trade with you to try and get some of like the effects and cards that I'm looking for. And that's not all. I also have like plenty of the rares that you might want, promo cards, and even some of like the highly sought after alt arts. So definitely check that out. Not even everything I have is on my sheet, so kind of just let me know what you're looking for. But I'll have like a description of some of the uniques and things that I'm trying to pick up. I really want to make some of the heroes that are less popular from the previous expansion, and I'm kind of starting from scratch, and so it can be hard to get those like 3 uniques together. So yeah, if any of you like have anything that fits like the description of what I'm looking for, I'd love to trade with you and hook you up with some exciting cards that you might be looking for. But now let's jump into the meat of this video. This expansion's been so much fun, and I've been trying out all of the different factions. I've been getting a feel for which cards I like to play and which I don't, and today we're going to be giving you that abbreviated set review. I really don't think it makes sense to try and go through every card in the set. I just wouldn't have I wouldn't have enough time for that. And then I also feel like by the time I got through making those videos, we'd be like so far into the set, it wouldn't be as relevant anymore. So instead, I'm just going to be giving you the highlights, the cards that stand out to me the most. I'm going to be talking about the cards that I'm a little disappointed in, things that either just don't feel very competitive to me, or maybe they're just a little awkward and I didn't enjoy trying to play them myself. We're going to be talking about the cards that I really liked. Maybe that's because I think they're going to be super strong, or maybe it's just because they're a ton of fun. And I'm going to be bringing up some other cards too where I just really haven't made up my mind yet. Cards that I think I'm just not sure if they're like the best fit for some of the decks that I'm running them in, or I'm just like really not sure, what their place is going to be in the meta. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, how you're feeling about some of these cards, or if there's any others that I don't talk about today that you really want to highlight. I definitely haven't figured everything out in this expansion, but I do kind of want to get the conversation going. But that being said, there are definitely a couple of powerful cards and interactions that I've discovered early on, and I definitely want to share that with you guys right away so you can start reaping the benefits. We're going to be going faction by faction, starting with Axiom. The first card that is on this list is one I was a little bit disappointed in. It's this 5-drop Vishvakarma. Yeah, I feel like I thought this would be really strong, and I was throwing it in a lot of my deck lists originally. In the common form, it seems really good because essentially it can be a 1-cost 3/3/3 if you have like a 4-cost permanent to follow it up with. Even if you play a 3-cost permanent, it can still be a 2-cost 3/3/3. I feel like though in reality it was a little awkward, and most of the time I wanted to play my 4-cost permanents on 4 mana. So if you save them to be best with this card, it means you are playing them later than you would want in your curve. It could work well in a deck maybe where you play 2 4-cost permanents, because then the second day you could play this on 5 with one of those and have a really strong turn. But honestly, it felt like most of the time I actually wanted to play a 6-cost permanent in the form of Hive, which is pretty awkward to play with this. And then other times I'm just playing 3-cost permanents in my deck instead, like Ouroboros, Lyra, Bastion, and these come out well before this 5-drop. And so yeah, I think that this could definitely be good in the future, but in most of the decks I'm playing right now, it was just a little too hard to fit in the curve. A ton of people are playing Lyra Bastion versions of Sierra right now, where every card in their deck has a support ability to be able to dig farther into their deck or like reactivate this resupply trigger. And so yeah, there's not really a spot for this 5-drop in those decks. You just really want to play a bunch of cards with those support abilities or that resupply themselves. And so, well, I think this could be good down the line. I just don't really feel like it's going to be a powerhouse for now. Next card, though, one that I haven't really made up my mind on, that's going to be Avalanche. I definitely see the potential here. Sending to reserve any number of characters with like 4 mountain or less could be insane if you can hit some of your opponent's characters that are naturally weak in mountain. Thinking about last expansion, you could have removed this whole board. This would be like a pretty powerful and normal board to see from Waru. With the really low stats on the Frog Prince and the Gate, you could easily wipe out like 3 characters from a Waru, and yeah, that's ridiculous for a 3-cost card. You're literally getting better value here than if you played Kraken's Wrath. So I think that depending on what decks are meta, this could definitely have a place. You might be saying Waru's fallen out of favor, so we're not going to have this opportunity again, but there are other decks like the new Rin decks that play a lot of cards with 0s or very low stats in Mountain. If you go up against a rack, you can probably clear their whole board with an Avalanche too. So I think that while this might not always be an absolute powerhouse, there definitely will be times in the future where this is a must include. I can understand though Keylon Burst being better in some metas and decks, because if you're primarily wanting to get rid of like a Lyra Festival or powerful permanents, Keylon Burst is the only one of these 2 removals that can do that. Also, if you're facing 3-cost cards that might have like a 5 stat in Mountain, or you just mostly want to remove one single target and keep the flexibility of being able to hit permanents, I can see Keylon Burst being the better option. If you're not hitting like 2 cards consistently with Avalanche and it's mostly hitting 1, at that point I think it'd probably be better to switch to Keylon Burst. So I'm curious to see which one proves to be the best in the long run. This card, next one, I'm pretty excited about. I mentioned this a little bit in the intro. Nilam, the Withered Tree. Yeah, I really fell in love with this card for Sierra. It's super strong. When you play it from hand, you'll be able to exhaust a card in your opponent's reserve. You get a Moth for it, and then when you tap Sierra, and you can get another 2/2/2 token. So at that point, you've gotten full stats for the cost, essentially, a split between two bodies, and you exhausted a card in reserve. And now it's kind of like a mini Brass Bug Hive where you're able to get a free token every day. I think, though, that the one thing holding this back a little bit is there's not that many great cards to trigger it right now. There definitely are a lot of options, but some of them aren't as powerful. Frozen Delivery is my favorite, but you can only use this once since it only exhausts itself with the cooldown ability when it's played from hand. But this is super strong. Being able to get a 2/2/2 and resupply is absolutely insane value. And then another card that I'm also really excited to pair with Nilam is the Mechanical Training. I think that this is super good because now it's basically just like a 1-cost exhaust your opponent's card and summon a 2/2/2. I feel like, yeah, 1 cost to get a body and be able to disrupt your opponent is just so strong. I think people haven't really thought about Mechanical Training being a good trigger for this card, but especially if you're running Hives on the top end, that can make this card good early and late as well. I think there's definitely a lot of potential here, especially as we get future cards to pair with Nilam, that this could really become like a powerful deck. For now, though, I think a lot of people are just playing Ouroboros and things instead of Nilam, and so maybe there's not like a place for it. If you pair Cleonic Heater and Machine in the Ice and some of these other cards with the tree, it's not as good because these are only really good if you have it. Otherwise, you're going to play like in a card that's below average for its cost. If you have to pay 4 to get the Machine in the Ice out for a 5/3/5, that's just all right, and it's delayed. And then the Heater triggering your Sierra is really nice, but if you're not getting both tokens, then you're kind of like under what you'd expect. And so I think that it'll be really strong in the future when we get enough cards that are already good even before you have the Withered Tree out, and then afterwards they're just even better. Like at that point, this card will be insane. And even now, if you get 2 of these out, some of these like slightly weaker cards like Machine in the Ice, all of a sudden now that's a 1 cost for multiple tokens, and it can just get crazy. All right, let's jump to Bravos. A card that I am not impressed with at all is Mana Flare. Wow. This card has fleeting, meaning that you're losing resources when you play it. It gives the card you play afterwards with it fleeting, all just to cheat out 1 mana. This is like a worse version of the coin from Hearthstone. I really don't see where this is going to fit in, but I'm sure that you've all already realized that at least right now, this card's kind of trash. I don't think I want to be talking too much about the obviously bad cards, but that one just was, I don't know, so rough to me that I feel like I had to give it a shout out. For the rest of the video, though, I'm going to try and be talking about cards that I think it's like a little bit more of a hot take, where I'm either trying to say that it's a card people think might be good that I don't really agree with, or a card that I think is surprisingly good that you might not have realized. This one, though, it's Technical Boots. I can definitely see the potential here. For 1 cost, removing fleeting seems like a good effect, but I think in practice, this card, it's just not doing it for me. I feel like the ability to give something a boost as well with Helping Hand is just so much better, and it's so tough because this says when my expedition moves forward, you can have a character lose fleeting, but this can be pretty hard to guarantee because you might play this having a card you really want to remove fleeting from, and then if you don't actually win that side, you lose out on getting that character to go back into your reserve. And so I think Helping Hand is just a lot better overall. Also, if this goes to your reserve because you will have won the side that it's on, then the other card that lost fleeting does as well. You've already filled your reserve, meaning that this only really is good if you played no cards from your hand that turn, or else you're overfilling the reserve. So I feel like the amount of times where this is good is just so low. I'd probably just rather play another character that I'm like happy playing with decent stats over trying to use this to recycle one. I can see this being best with something like Bravos Tracer. I do feel, though, like at this point when you're paying 3 to get 4/3/4 in stats, essentially, maybe you should just play a Haven Warrior or something. So yeah, even like in a situation like this with Bravos Tracer, I'm still not that impressed. The next card that I'm definitely excited about, but still just kind of trying to figure out, is Arcolano Milk in both forms. I definitely think this is a powerful card. I'm just not sure yet if it's going to be like in the meta or how good it's going to be. I think like in the future, there'll definitely be a place for it. And I think it might even be now, but I'm just still trying to figure it out. Cards like the Seringer are really good because when they get fleeting, they get like a benefit. Like now you're going to draw a card when it leaves. And so at that point, it's like replacing yourself, not hurting your resources. But in a lot of other situations where you're giving things fleeting, especially if they weren't going to have it already, that can be pretty awkward. Now you're going to like drain your resources quick. But I do love that you can just like play this on the side that you're losing to set up for the next day and like bank a ton of advantage. And if you like set this up on the side your Buddha's about to spawn on, you don't even really care that that'll gain fleeting. There's a lot of like cards too that you want to just like boost and put in the mana, like the Djinns and all sorts of stuff that this works really well with. I do think it's going to be super good, and it works super well too with all of the cards that remove fleeting from themselves, because you can trigger the milk first and then boost them and remove the fleeting. Hua Mulan is a great example. I can really see this doing a ton of damage in all sorts of Bravos heroes. So yeah, I'm definitely excited about this card, and I'm just trying to figure out the best deck to make it work. There are a lot of other really good permanents too, like the Icebound Peak or Haven Bravos Bastion. And while you can play them and this because this is an expedition permanent, I think if you have a deck without enough characters, at some point you might just not have any stats to put out to pair with those cards. And so, yeah, finding that balance will be tricky, but at some point when it works out, it'll definitely be worth it. And now this next card, it might be the one I'm the most excited about from the set. Eat Me Energy Bars. Wow, it only took me a second to fall in love with this card. It's just so fun, and I definitely think it has a lot of competitive potential. I feel like the advantage this has over basically all of the other gears is that this can help you progress your expeditions without sending itself to the reserve. All of the other ones help you on one side, their side, and then when you move forward, they go away. But this one, you can actually use it to move on the other side, advancing your win con while also setting it up to still be there the next day. And if you can start the day with one of these on the board, that's just going to be so much free stats that you're going to get and so much pressure on your opponent. Yeah, this is really cool, and I think it really highlights like everything that a gear can be. I love playing a pretty sizable character and then having my opponent block me just for me to drop this and essentially switch my attack to the other side. Now I'm not really like punished at all for having my stats get blocked by my opponent, because I'm just able to shift all that pressure to where I'm not being blocked and win the side exactly what I want, while also having this now stick around to the next day to do it again. It's so good, and there are crazy interactions in Bravos with this. With Sakurabru, now that it's in both expeditions, both of your opponent's expeditions are facing it and will move backwards when you drop this. While it is a 10 mana combo, I mean, I've already seen it happen a lot in Itsadi, and it's just kind of the cherry on the top for a card that's already good on its own. But there are some weird interactions you're going to want to watch out for. Amarok and this card are not friends. If you play this on the side with the energy bar and make it gigantic, either expedition you play your cards to, they're going to be tributed. And the thing you might not have realized is if you play the energy bar on the opposite side of Amarok and you drop a card down, since it's gigantic, it counts as being in Amarok's expedition on the other side as well, and it will also be sacrificed. So if you ever have an energy bar out and Amarok on the same side or different sides, the rest of the characters you play that day are going to be sacrificed. So yeah, watch out for that. Let's jump to Lyra. The card I'm a little disappointed in is Will-O-the-Wisp, and honestly, even though I think this card's a little more awkward than I expected, I still think it has a very good chance that it'll see a lot of play early on. I think that it wouldn't be fair to leave out the out-of-faction version of this when I do my review, because honestly, I'm probably more disappointed with the Muna version than I am with the Lyra. I think especially when this is a common, it's not that big a deal to play it. If you can drop it on day one, it's probably best, because that's when you're going to be in water and your opponent, and now it's basically just like a 3/3/3. And so at that point, now you're just playing like a 3-cost 3/3/3, and then you can use it later to discount a card you play. That's definitely powerful. Resupplying this is powerful. Getting it in the reserve with Fen is pretty good. But I think that this card The thing that it's the worst at is it actually getting value out of its ability, which is why I wanted to mention it here. Especially just like even playing in sealed events early on or just testing this out a little bit, it's very hard to have your opponent be in the region type that this interacts with and also have you be in that region type. And if you aren't in a situation like that, you can't really get any value out of it to try and push the expeditions. Maybe you're blocking your opponent or something, but if you're not advancing as well at the same time, it just doesn't work. So this seems a lot weaker to me than Persephone. On average, once you get out of the starting expeditions, your opponent's going to be in forest on one side and not on the other, or water on one side and not on the other, since half of the expeditions have each of the region types. Basically, yeah, you got like a 50-50, meaning that on one side, they'll probably be in the region type that pairs with this. But now, for yourself, you also only have like a 50-50 for that side that you're going to be in that region type. And so, while it'll come up every once in a while, I don't know if I really want to like be building my decks around cards that are just good so inconsistently. That takes me to the next card that, yeah, I'm just really still trying to gauge the power of. The winter outfits. I think people went crazy when they saw this card because it really seems strong to take away basically the only downside of a lot of the Lyra characters, especially for Iraq, making your characters have their strongest region statistic for all three types seems crazy. And I think, though, in reality, a lot of the times you were just able to play your characters into regions purposefully to only use them like when those statistics weren't that relevant, meaning now you can like pay one to get around something that you were able to do on your own. I think this card works best with cards with one very spiked stat. If you play it with like a 3-0-3 or something, 50% of the regions in the middle, that card's already a 3-3-3. But this gets really crazy with something like Lyra Navigator, where now you're making this a 4-4-4 for 2 in all of the expeditions in the middle, where it only was in one of them before. But there's very few cards right now that are like this. In the future, if we can get a lot more cards like the Navigator, you'll be able to get plenty of value out of this for sure. And it definitely still might be viable now, especially just like as an after you or something, or like a surprise for your opponent. But I think this card is kind of going to be waiting for some more cards like the Navigator to come around, especially in common, that can really take advantage of the benefit. It kind of goes back to like the boots with Tracer, where when you have to pay 3 now for that card, it's not good anymore. For winter outfits and Navigator, now you're playing 3 for a 4-4-4, which is just kind of average. It is nice though that you got to split it over 2 cards played, but with a lot of the other cards you're playing, the payoff's even worse. And so yeah, it's just, I think, a little tough right now. I am pretty excited though for the out of faction version. I don't think that it'll be super competitive, but I feel like they found the perfect home for it because there are a lot of spike stats in Muna. You've got things like Aloe Vera, just like a perfect card. Now all of a sudden you've got an anchored 4-4-4 instead. That's crazy. 2 days in a row even. And Son of Yggdrasil, which just has a crazy forest stat and not much else going for it. But now when you make it gigantic 6-6-6 on both sides, that's just quite a lot of value, especially with the toughen things. I feel like you could really catch your opponent off guard. Play the Syntasia, it's like a 7-7-7 on both sides. Yeah, that can be pretty impressive quickly. That takes us to a card that I feel pretty good about. It's the Haven Seringer. I feel like I'm almost shouting this out for Bravos too at the same time. I just think the option to be able to draw a card on a 2-drop with decent stats is really good. It reminds me of Yzmir, which was the first suspended common. It's true that you aren't getting the draw both times, but hey, maybe that just means it's going to stick around and not get banned. Looking at this, when you play it from reserve, it's actually a 4-1-1. This is one of those cards that I actually think can be pretty crazy with the winter outfit. So if you're playing that deck, this could be really good. With Persephone, you can suddenly be ignoring mountain and water as well, which is so strong. I feel like these two are like the perfect combo together. It is using a lot of your rare slots though, so I don't know if everyone will be able to afford to play this, but it feels like a really cool interaction and something I want to be trying out in Iraq. And even in like other decks, or different versions. You can just run Nyala or the Sleight of Hand to be able to put this straight into the reserve as well and kind of avoid the weaker version of it and maybe get something else back from your reserve that's better in hand. So I think that, yeah, there are a lot of cool cards that can help you get the most advantage out of this in the set. Honestly, even though I feel really good about this card, though, it is tough right now because the card pool is just getting bigger and bigger, which means that you have a lot of competition, especially with only 15 rare slots, turns into basically 5 rare names per deck. I don't know if this card will see a ton of play right now because it just might not fit perfectly into the Fen decks or the Iraq decks, but I'm sure that this will have like a place down the line because, yeah, it just seems like there's so much potential in here. And having 2 zeros as well is pretty good for triggering some of like the effects that require 3 zeros on the board. So yeah, there's just a lot of utility and potential in this card in my mind. We're halfway through. Let's jump into the Muna cards now. The Muna card that isn't quite doing as much for me as I would have hoped is Yeti. I feel like this card seems really cool. Having a when effect just seems so insane for a common. Being able to give every character that joins your expeditions a boost just seems insane, but you can't quite take advantage of that as much as some of the other factions would. You don't have a ton of token spam like in Ordis, and you don't have as much payoff for boosts as Bravos might, but I think that someday when the right cards come, you'll really be able to get like enough bang for your buck out of this that it will be worth running. That 4 cost though from reserve right now is tough, and the fact that it only gains a sleep from hand is also tricky because it makes it very different the first time it's played from the second time it's played. If you were wanting to set this up kind of like a permanent, just boosting your stuff for 2 days, then the second time now it's way more expensive and you get it around for way less time. So honestly, it might just be that like reserve version on its own making this card a little bit of a dud, but also because you can only usually play like 2 or 3 characters after this to get boost between like the 2 days, you just can't take advantage of it as much as other factions might, to where, yeah, it just isn't quite as good as I'd hoped. It is nice that you can use things like Muna Caregiver and other stuff that anchors cards with a 3 or less hand cost to keep this around maybe for more and more days in a row. But is that really better than just anchoring something that's self-boosting or providing card advantage like Aloe Vera? I don't necessarily think it is for now, but I am excited to see if anyone else can figure out a great home for this card or see when it'll prove to be powerful in the future. The next set of cards I'm looking at, starting with Lost in the Woods. This card, when I saw the reveal, I was so excited. I'm like, Muna has some of the worst removals. I feel like Mana Reaping, while it can hit anything, giving your opponent a mana is just such a big cost. It makes you have to be really considerate of like the timing that you use it. If you just jam it early, even on a good target, you might give your opponent too much benefit to where it wasn't even worth getting rid of that card. I thought that Lost in the Woods was like the perfect solution. Sending a character to reserve in Forest can basically be like a non-cost if they were just in Forest anyway, or with some of the new cards from the set, if you can make it Forest, then there's essentially no drawback on this card. Being able to discard a permanent as well makes this super flexible, and that isn't tied to Forest. So yeah, I was pretty sure this would be like an auto include, but I'm surprised to see a lot of people not running it and choosing to run things like Mana Reaping instead. And honestly, even myself playing this, if you're not running Ren with a bunch of cards that force things to be Forest, or if you're running like the common being instead of the rare, I can see this only being good about half the time, and maybe you'd rather just run a card that's a little weaker, but it always does what you want. So yeah, I'm definitely not convinced one way or the other yet, but this is a card I have my eye on. I definitely think it could be good, but I just don't know for sure if it's our best option. Icebound Taiga has kind of a similar theme here, having to play characters in Forest. When you get your third trial counter from playing 3 characters in Forest, you're going to be summoning a Dragon Shade 5/5/5 illusion token, and yeah, that's going to get anchored. I think that this is probably the strongest Icebound card in the set. A lot of them are a little underwhelming to me, but this one, getting 10/10/10 worth of stats split between 2 days for 3 mana, even though it's delayed, I feel like that's just such a big payoff that it'll have to be worth it in some decks. If you only 2-0 your opponent after setting this up, you might have like lost 2-0 the day you played this, and then you're just even. But I think with this card getting anchored, the Dragon Shade, you could possibly win 2-0 multiple days in a row once this pops. And so, yeah, I think that this one definitely has the potential to do some damage. I feel like, though, if you aren't playing those cards again that force things to be forest, it might be hard to activate this when you want, just depending on like what regions you end up in. And so I don't know if like for sure like Tasia or Arjan or something are going to be jamming this in them. They definitely might not be. And so, well, yeah, I think this card's really strong, but I just don't know where it's going to fit yet or like just how good it'll be. And this next card, it's on here honestly just because it's been so much fun to play with and it can create some of the craziest game states I've seen. Yeah, I definitely think some of like the most ridiculous boards I've ever seen in an altar had to do with this card, Sasaka, Sly Naturalist here. It's a 3-cost 1/1/1 from hand and reserve, and it's going to target any number of other characters in Forest when it's played, and they gain 2 boosts. Wow, that's honestly crazy. I feel like while this is situational, you're just going to be holding this in your hand until things do line up. And when they do, you can easily boost like 4 characters with this, getting essentially 999 worth of stats for a 3-cost character. That is so out of this world. It's so much stronger, I feel like, than almost anything we saw in set 1. But it is a little bit situational. I think people are underrating this card, though, and that it definitely could see a little bit more play. You got things like Ogun that are also good and a little bit maybe easier to use, but I definitely think people should consider maybe even running both of them or swapping them out for this, because especially in Rin, if you're making the Regions Forest anyway, this is going to be an insane finisher. Imagine popping the Dragon Shade that we were just looking at, giving it 2 boosts. Now it's a 7/7/7 with anchored. You can literally play this out in Forest to get your last counter, pop the Dragon Shade, and then still boost it just by picking the order that you activate your card's effects. And so, yeah, there are some wild things that this can do. And Moon is just so good, too, at, like, playing a little Spindle Harvester, a little Sneezer Shroom, and then the next day you already have a couple bodies out, play a couple more cards and drop this. Yeah, I think that you'll be able to get some crazy 2-0s, and boosting has so much synergy as well with a lot of like the good uniques and just different cards in the set. Magic Bean's another card that can boost, and so yeah, if you're running something like Spindle Harvesters, just put that package in and boom, all of a sudden you have a way to activate Sasaka. Multiple ways to trigger Spindle Harvesters. You could easily run the common Bean too as well if you're tight on rare slots. I definitely think there's a deck here. Maybe it won't be the best version of Tasia, maybe not even the best version for Rin, but I definitely think people at least need to give it a shot because, yeah, there's so much potential here. And now let's jump into Ordis. This faction's been a terror for so long. It arguably had the best starter deck, the first half of the last expansion with Woru, and then probably even one of the best decks the second half of the expansion as well with Sigismar. But today, the new Trial by Frost card I want to talk about that is not looking too good to me is Woru and Mac. Yeah, maybe this is a little bit of a meme, but this is basically a whole new card now. They've totally changed the effect, and it's much worse than before. Now, I'm not saying for sure that this card is completely bad still or unplayable, but it's definitely gone downhill from where we were. For sure, like they said, in the future, they're printing crazy bureaucrats. They needed to, like, bring Woru down a little bit to be ready for that. I can see that, but I don't think we have all of those bureaucrats yet, and I don't even think we have enough non-bureaucrats, really, to support the Woru strategies. I've been really trying to make this work, and I feel like at best, it's just like almost as good as the best decks, but I really don't see it being better than them. Maybe with your best hands, you're like on the same power level as them, but there's a lot of consistency problems now. Essentially, if you have a bureaucrat and a non-bureaucrat in your hand, you can still have the option to choose to sleep or not sleep the card you play by just playing a card that does or doesn't get a sleep with Woru. But that kind of requires you now to just have multiple different cards in hand to be able to choose from. You can't just have like one card in hand and pick what happens to it. You have to have options. And without Ozma and with just like the natural like tight resource game of Altered, it's pretty hard to have bureaucrats in hand for if that's what you want to do, and non-bureaucrats in hand for if you like need to push the expedition or respond to what your opponent does. Also, if you're also trying to run like removals or any sort of other tech cards in your deck, all of a sudden now you're just playing way too many different types of cards, and you can't have all of them in your hand at the same time. It makes like your draws awkward, your mana awkward, and so yeah, for now, I just don't think War is going to be there yet this expansion. We have some cards like Rallying Call and things that already in this set kind of make up for the new weakness of Waru, but I feel like now it's like we've gotten from like no maybe downsides to Waru to like multiple all at once. First, it's like a deck building downside to me where you have to run a deck full of like combo pieces that are only good in certain combinations. So it's like you're naturally running a less consistent deck to your opponent. Now you also have the hero power where you're less flexible with it and your plays, you have like less options than your opponent. And now, like Tasia and Basira and everything, you're going to be going all in on one character that your opponent can remove. Because if you play a character from your hand to get a sleep, and then you use a Rallying Call, common or rare, on it to wake that up and give it anchored or just like a boost in things, just like Tasia, you're over-invested into one card that your opponent can remove. And so it's like, now you have like all of the weaknesses of Tasia and Basira plus like so many more. It'll definitely be playable. It can work. And in the future, I'm sure like we're going to get the support to really make this deck sing again. But yeah, for now, I just don't really see us being there yet. And honestly, Waru was my main deck all last expansion. I'm playing cards like Monolith Runescribe now that are like vanillas with no effect just because there's no other option really to replace the bureaucrats that you can't play awake anymore. It was so nice to be able to play my like 2/2/2 bureaucrat either asleep or awake. But now if I want to play a 2/2/2 for 2 to push an expedition, I also have to have this Runescribe in my deck and in my hand. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe someday we're going to get like all of the perfect non-bureaucrats that have like effects that interact with bureaucrats and things that can like really work well together. But for now, yeah, I'm just playing so many vanillas like this and things, and I just don't see this deck being a powerhouse this expansion. What card, though, am I on the fence for? It's going to be Ordis Liaison. I'm honestly starting to lean towards not liking this card more than liking it. I was really excited when this was printed. I think that this effect is very powerful. It has the potential to compound if you have a lot of bodies in play and just give you way more stats for the cost than you deserve. In the past, I was looking for uniques like this, just as like a 2 cost or 3 cost though, preferably, to be able to boost my whole board for Waru. And I feel like, yeah, this was so good. Like people were playing these in the unique form even, and like using a slot just to get this effect in their deck. But having it be a 4 cost from hand and reserve, and also the fact that it doesn't boost itself, makes it maybe just not quite good enough all the time, where like there will be games where it would be a strong play, but because in many other situations you won't get enough value out of this, it might just start to creep out of people's decks. I think too that the best deck to play this in was going to be Waru, and I was super excited to throw 3 copies of this into my old Waru build, because in Waru you actually basically have 2 days worth of cards out at once. You would have all of the cards you played last turn plus the new ones you played asleep, and you'd be able to boost all of them at once with this, and you'd get that free token as well. But now you take away the token and you just make that hero a little less viable, and this card I was super excited about, I'm just not sure yet if it's going to have a place anymore. I'm sure someday this is going to have a home, especially if like we get more permanents and things that can summon extra bodies. But yeah, even in Sigmar, if you're not running things like the carrier and you only have like the cards you played that day and a token, you're probably not going to get enough characters out for this to be worth it compared to like the boards and things that I was expecting to be able to buff with this in Waru. This takes us now though to some very exciting cards that I think can really turn things around for Golrong. I've got Sinisa here and the Mobile Armory. I feel like until now, Golrong was honestly just like half a hero. You just stole some of Sigmar's cards and honestly didn't even use them that much better than him. And now though, we've got cards that really have a lot of synergy with that hero. being able to remove the biggest downside, the defender, from your cards is huge, and both of these cards get great stats for their cost. Mobile Armory going to be a 2/2/2 for 1, and it takes away your hero's biggest downside. Similarly, Sanusa, it's going to either be like a 4/4/4 for the common, or 5 worth of stats split between 2 bodies for the rare. Yeah, these seem really strong to me. I think they're one of like the last missing pieces we were looking for. It's going to make it so that you can actually progress in the early game, and then in the late game, they're just still really good value for the cost with that hero who buffs all of your tokens. Even with these, I have a hard time seeing Golrung become like that top 1 meta deck, because it has a little bit of a hard time setting up future advantage. If you pay the big 5 cost permanents to like really make a ton of advantage for the future, you're opening yourself up to removals and you'll get really behind early on. But then if you don't play those, you're just working with whatever you can drop from your hand each turn, which can be really good with like rare open the gates and things, but other decks might be able to create a similar advantage around 8 mana and like that stage in the game. So we'll just have to see how good this is, if it's kind of like some rogue strategy or if it can start making it to the top tables. There's another really good new card from this expansion that works super well from these. With the Chrysalis, you can get essentially 5/5 worth of stats as well for just 2 mana, split between 2 days. And if you can remove the defender with like these cards here on the left, it is really good. But I have started to see that it can be awkward again if you don't get these things to line up. And if you don't draw your cards that remove defender with the Chrysalis, now once you play it, you've put a defender in your expedition for 2 days in a row, making it really easy for your opponent to like know your game plan the next day and push the other side and things. And so I see a ton of potential here. But yeah, sometimes things just still aren't lining up for me. Also, I do want to point out that I'm not even sure if you need the rare version of either of these. I think that a lot of times the common could be just as good. It's interesting, after you've hit 8 mana, the common Mobile Armory is just as good as the rare. So it's like, do you want to waste that slot on something that you aren't always getting value out of? I think you definitely probably will, but I think there's a lot of room to experiment with the common version of both of these, especially for Sunisa. The common's basically as good as the rare. You lose out on like 1 worth of stats, but you still have the important effect. And in the late game, if you are winning on both sides, Sunisa's not even good anymore. And so if you're sometimes putting this in the mana and stuff, maybe the downgrade to the common is worth it. And if you are just playing a bunch of 5 cost permanents and things in your Golrung deck, and just knowing that as long as you make it to 8 mana, you're going to win no matter what, maybe you aren't as worried about winning an expedition early on with Mobile Armory, and instead you just want to save those rare slots for something else, and the common's going to be good enough because blocking your opponent is all that you care about, and you don't actually need to advance early on. So yeah, it's definitely something to think about. While one version of these cards I'm sure will be in every Golrung deck, I can't say for sure that it would have to be the rare at this point. That's taking us to our last faction now. Let's take a look at the Yzmir cards. So these ones that I'm a little disappointed with, it's both of the Icebound cards. Even though these cost 2, I feel like you don't get that much value out of the additional effect on them. Returning to a card to your hand, that can be pretty good, but playing zeros is a pretty high cost, and I don't know if decks naturally do that right now in Yzmir. Icebound Lake, too, just giving something to sleep, I don't know, you might not really always have a good target for that. And even though 5/5/5 for 2 is pretty good, having it be so delayed, I think that isn't always worth it, because you might not even really be able to make up for the expeditions you lost early on. I did see someone running this Icebound Tundra already with 3 unique Spindle Harvesters and a Faunus that have multiple zeros. And then you can also run it with like Blade Dancer and things, which has all zeros, but then it buffs itself. So there are some cool options to trigger the Tundra especially, but these probably aren't going to be worth it. I don't even think the Icebound Pass is going to be that good. Most of the other factions can run their Icebound card as a common, and it's almost as good as the rare, but having it be 4 cost seems just so expensive to eventually get a 5/5/5 that draws a card. I feel like that could almost have been a card on its own, like a 5/5/5 draw a card, gain fleeting essentially too, because all of these cards, since they sacrifice themselves, you only get 1 play out of them, which is just like another drawback. Like that 5/5/5 gain fleeting for 4 draw card, while that is like a little above average, that's not even that much ahead of a normal card, and now you have to also exhaust 3 things to get there, which isn't easy. Even in decks that are like built around exhausting your opponent's cards, it's not always going to line up so that you can trigger that exactly when you want. So yeah, I don't know. All of these to me, I'm sure in the perfect deck they'll be all right, but they're definitely not auto includes, and they're all proving to be a little bit more awkward than I expected. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not quite as impressed with them. What about this next card? Sleight of Hand. I thought this thing was going to be crazy when I originally saw it, and I haven't actually had as much time to test out Afanis as some of the other heroes, but I have seen a lot of people aren't choosing to run it. I think it is tough. The fact that it's a rare means that if you're playing this, you're not playing another powerful rare, and so now it's like, even though this can let you reuse some of your really good cards, you're also playing 3 less copies of another good card to be able to fit it in, so maybe things just kind of even out. But I still think that people are underrating this, and we should at least try it and give it a chance, because returning Off You Go to your hand, returning Magical Training to your hand, that seems so good, and I still feel like it probably has to be good and have a place somewhere. I'm definitely going to be trying this out, but honestly, Off You Go is one of the most unbalanced cards in the game from hand. It's just so good to be able to remove a 3-cost card with this for 2, or like a really powerful, unique, or anchored character, or something that's been buffed for 2. You can always get like more value out of this than its cost. And if you can return this to hand, you're just getting the really good version of it multiple times. With Magical Training and Afanis too, it's like both of those cards are 1 cost, 1/1/1 plus something else that's like benefiting your resources. I feel like a 1/1/1 that's somehow giving you like a little bit of card advantage at the same time just seems so good. So yeah, honestly, I think there's a lot of potential here, but just from like seeing some other people's lists and just thinking about how the rare slots are tight, yeah, I'm still a little bit on the fence about this card. Taking us to the last card we're going to be looking at for this set review, it's going to be Moth Lantern. It's kind of poetic here. The first card I revealed, now I'm bringing it back here at the end of this set review. I still am super excited about this card. I feel like Lindua didn't get that much support. You can definitely run things like Chrysalis, sacrifice it, and then all of a sudden you get another Moth out. You remove the defender, you have like a body. There are some interesting cards for her, but this set obviously wasn't as much for Lindua. We didn't get like a crazy amount of support, and so I think this is a card that's really strong, but it's going to have to wait to shine in the future. I honestly think that this card is one of the main reasons that the Jellyfish had to go, because if you were just boosting one side over and over and over for 1 mana on your Maw token, not only would your opponent be able to remove that with like a single removal card and just blow up your strategy, but also they could just play on the other side and at least be trading with you. But with this card, if you can get multiple sacrifices in a day, you'll just get so many stats for this thing. And the only thing your opponent can do is try and block you, at which point, if they do, you're going to have it the next day already in play to start all over again. So yeah, just imagine if the Jellyfish weren't banned and there was a way to loop them, you'd play this on one side, put Maw on the other. For the rest of that day, you'll just be paying 1 mana to put 2 worth of stats on both sides. That would be an incredible amount of pressure, and while that's not available to us now, I'm just sure at some point in the future we're going to get a way to get a lot of sacrifices in the same day with Lindua, and this card will just be ready. And maybe even now this card will already be able to make some moves with Lindua. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what happens with this one moving forward. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. There are so many cool cards in the set. I got to talk about some of them, but others like the Snow Queen and Magic Slay, I didn't even have time to get to. Let me know in the comments, which of these cards do you think I'm rating wrong, and what are some of your favorites that I didn't get to talk about today? If you enjoy this type of content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Moving forward, I want to bring you guys some exciting content and deck profiles. Without any major events for the US coming up, I'm honestly starting to think that I don't really have a reason to keep some of my secret sauce hidden from you. So if I can't be taking down a tournament with them, I might as well be sharing some of those lists I've been cooking up with you on this channel. I'm really giving everything a shot. I've been looking at the mainstream and off-meta heroes, and I really feel like I've been able to put together some masterpieces. I am just a few unique short of where I want to be, so definitely check out my trades like I mentioned at the beginning of this video. There's just so much to look forward to at the start of this new expansion. I just can't wait to see what happens. Until next time, thank you so much for watching.